I heard this story from a friend. On the way home from work at night, he always took the same road where he passed an apartment building. In one of the rooms, he could see someone standing in the light. But this figure appeared to be dancing passionately, and every time he passed, he always saw the same thing. One day, he ran into the landlord of that building, and so he decided to ask him about that person. Does a professional dancer live up there? They always seem to be working really hard. The landlord told him that room was empty, but he definitely saw someone dancing there every night he passed. Then, the landlord went pale. Maybe you saw the previous tenant, A-san. Apparently, a man by the name of A-san hung himself there, and he was flailing in great pain as he died. Hey guys, I'm your host, Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. If you're looking for more to listen to once you're done with this episode, I've been recording various audiobooks that you can now find on our Patreon, Fourth Wall store, and various audiobook outlets, including Spotify. I'm adding more all the time, so if you need another hit of Japanese horror, head over to patreon.com/TaraADevlin, the Kowabana Fourth Wall shop, or your favorite online store to pick some up right now. This week, we're heading back to the staple of Japanese horror. It's bread and butter, if you will. Good old Yurei. Those angry, sad, lost, and generally terrifying spirits that cling to this world, and sometimes even us, unable to move on. First up, a student is unable to sleep because of an important sports competition the next day, so he decides to go running in the hopes that it might help exhaust him. But while out on the late-night streets, he encounters something that makes him wish he would have just stayed in bed. Find out why in Running. This happened when I was in high school. I was a member of the basketball club, and because we had a competition the following day with some other schools, I was so nervous that I couldn't sleep. I have to go to sleep early, I thought. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't sleep. 3 a.m. arrived, and I was still awake. I wasn't even sleepy, and all I could think about was the following day, and how I had to go to bed early for it. Thinking I could maybe force myself to feel tired with some exercise, I changed into my red shirt and went outside to go running. I must have run for around 20 minutes, and because it was the rainy season, it was awfully humid. Before long, I finally started to feel tired and wanted to quickly shower and go to bed, so I left my usual route and took a shortcut through a nearby residential area instead. This area faced a forest, and there was a thin footpath in the pitch black of night that ran between this forest on the left and the houses on the right. Shortly after moving onto this footpath, a chill suddenly ran down my spine. I started imagining weird things, like ghosts or monsters. Then I realized the sound of my own footsteps was odd. I could hear my own, but there was also another sound that was clearly someone else's footsteps, and they were irregular, like they were trying to keep pace, but also catch up with me. I'm a coward, so I picked up the pace in fear. Of course, I started breathing harder, and then I could hear someone breathing right behind me as well. It was almost like I was being chased by a dog, although I've never had that happen before. But that breathing behind me gradually got closer, closer, and closer. Was it a pervert? I wondered. But as I felt breath on the nape of my neck, I didn't think it could even be human, let alone that of a pervert. The breath stank like earth, and before long, I could hear it right next to my ear. I broke out in goosebumps all over. And then, unable to bear it any longer, I turned around. But nothing was there. No breathing, no footsteps. All I could hear was myself. I felt embarrassed at how scared I was, and relieved, I started running again. Then I looked at a large window on one of the houses to my right. It was facing the sidewalk and had thick curtains pulled shut. Of course, I could see my reflection in the glass. At first, I didn't notice. I was wearing my red shirt with a towel around my neck, like I always did when I went running. But something didn't feel right. As I glanced at that large window, I started running again. I almost fell over when I saw my reflection. The thing that felt wrong was my towel. I thought it was my towel, but in reality, it was the upper half of a woman with messy hair. She was clinging to me. What I thought was my towel around my neck was actually her pale arms. You might think I just saw it wrong because I was running, right? But there was no way it was anything else. And that day, I left my towel at home. And that woman's messy hair was bobbing up and down as her head moved to the rhythm of my running. I guess at some point, she caught up with me. After that, I ran home, barely able to lift my knees. And of course, I wasn't able to sleep a wink, and we ended up losing our match the next day. That's the only experience I've ever had like that, but I wonder if maybe she still haunts me. The woman in this next story moves into a brand new apartment, but soon finds something odd. Long black hairs lying around the place. Who could they belong to, and why do they keep showing up? Find out in Pretty Hair. I moved into a new apartment, a corner room on the first floor. The location was great and it got good sunlight. There were no complaints from me. On the day I moved in, I had some drinks with the friends who helped me move long into the night. After all my friends had gone home after lunch the following day, I decided to shower. One of my friends was a smoker, and I was afraid the smell might get stuck to my hair. My hair was my pride and joy. I never permed nor dyed it, and it was long, straight, black hair. I always took great care of it. After shampooing, treating, and rinsing it, I left the bathroom feeling refreshed. Now it was time to clean up after the night before. I picked up all the empty snack packets and cans of drink, and as I was cleaning, I noticed something odd. There were quite a few long hairs around the place. It was exactly the same length as mine, but the quality was different. None of my friends had long hair like me, and I had only just moved in, so... Finding it strange, I decided it had to be my own and calmed myself down. Another friend who couldn't help the day before was coming that same day, so when she called me from the nearest station, I went out to pick her up. This friend was famous for having a strong sixth sense, and because I wasn't especially concerned about the hair, we chatted about this and that as we made our way back. When we got back, I found more long hairs on the ground again. I must have just forgotten to pick them up. I quickly put them in the bin. My friend lived in another prefecture, so naturally she was going to spend the night. "I'm just going to shower," she said, heading straight for the bathroom. I heard the shower turn on, but then suddenly I could no longer hear the water, and my friend came running out in a panic. "In the bathroom!" She was pale as a ghost. After calming her down, I asked what happened. "There was a woman with long hair in your bathroom." This was a newly built apartment building. There was no way there could be a ghost. But even as I tried to tell her that, she refused to listen and said she was going home. Even so, she had come from far away and it was late at night, so she couldn't return just like that either. "Look, at any rate, I can't stay in this apartment any longer. I'll spend the night at a nearby family restaurant, and if something happens to you too, well then, give me a call," she said, and then she left the apartment. I was left alone. And because of the hairs I'd found that day, I was feeling rather nervous. No, it would be fine. This was a new building after all. I tried to convince myself of that as I got in the shower again myself. Having a strong sixth sense requires careful thought too, huh? Ruining my new apartment like that. While silently cursing my friend as I shampooed my hair, I felt a strange sensation on my head. I was carefully massaging the skin without using my nails so as not to damage anything, like I always did. But something didn't feel right. I stopped moving. I nervously brought both hands that were on my head down to the front of my face, without using nails, just like I always did. Another hand was still massaging my head. "Who's there?" I turned around and a woman with a burnt face was standing there, a hand still on my head. "So pretty. Your hair is so pretty." It was definitely a woman's voice. As I came back to, I heard the shower still going. I had passed out with the bubbles still in my hair, and now it was stiff. But there was no time to worry about that. I quickly rinsed the bubbles out and then fled from the apartment after getting dressed. I went to the nearest public phone and then called my friend's cell, telling her I'd meet her at the restaurant. I knew it. "Let's ask the real estate about it tomorrow. I'll go with you." The next day, we asked the real estate agent about it. This is what they told me. Before the apartment building went up, there used to be a single house and florist there. The florist's daughter was a beautiful woman, proud of her long hair. But one day, a fire broke out in the house. The gas bath heater exploded in the bathroom. The daughter was there when it exploded, so she suffered terrible burns, and most of her beloved hair was burnt off too. Then her boyfriend dumped her, so she locked herself in the house. She only had a handful of hair left, but she apparently took great care of it. She shampooed, treated, and rinsed it several times a day, and then, as she stood in front of the mirror, combing it, she asked her mother, "Is my hair pretty? Is my hair pretty?" But then, that small amount of hair she had left also started to fall out from the emotional stress she was under. One day, she used the entire conditioner bottle her mother bought her, and then she took her own life in the bathroom. "Just like you, she had beautiful hair," the real estate agent said, looking at my hair fondly. Two students meet some girls at a driving school and they soon start hanging out. But once they graduate and lose contact, it seems they all go their separate ways. At least, until news comes in that one of them has died. What's really going on? Find out in... Wait. I heard this story from my friend, A. When A was a student, he went to a driving school in a different prefecture with his friend, B. They went to another prefecture because the school would find out they were getting a license if they did so in the same one. Anyway, at this driving school, they met two local girls, Siko and Diko, and they quickly became good friends. Whenever they went there, the four of them always hung out, even though A and B had girlfriends back home. However, they only ever intended to hang out with them while they were there, and as soon as they got their licenses, they stopped seeing Siko and Diko. The girls tried ringing them a few times, but they never answered, and so they didn't speak either. Some time passed, and then A dreamt of Siko. "I wanted to see you more," she said, her eyes downcast. "And we'd just gotten to know each other," she muttered before disappearing. Thinking something might have happened to her, A tried calling Siko, but he couldn't get through. He then called Diko, but he couldn't get through to her either. Unable to contact either of them, he gave up. There wasn't much else he could do. Some more time passed, and then Diko called him. She sounded upset. "Siko died," she said. It seemed that while the two were out walking one day, a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and drove onto the footpath. Siko died instantly, while Diko fell into a coma. Luckily, Diko recovered after spending some time in the hospital, but when she heard Siko died after she was discharged, she almost lost her mind, wondering why she was the only one who survived. A was thinking about how he could let B know, but before he could, B was involved in a bike accident. It seemed he pulled into the opposite lane to overtake a car, but when he did, he rode headfirst into an oncoming car. A rushed to the hospital to see him, but after remaining unconscious for a week, B passed away. A wasn't sure whether he should tell Diko about B's death, but now that two of them had died, he was lost and decided to call her. However, Diko didn't answer. Worried, he called her parents, but they said she had gone missing. Apparently, she went missing right after she called to tell him about Siko. At that point, A started to lose his mind as well. Why was he the only one still alive? He felt terrible, and day by day, these thoughts crushed him. Several days passed in a blurry haze, and he had no idea what happened during them. It wasn't until his mother later told him that he learnt. According to his mother, A lost all his vigor and locked himself in his room, even refusing to eat. Then one day, he came out and said to her, "Ma, can you put some snacks out? A friend is here." He then poured 4 glasses of juice and took them to his room. When did they get here? She wondered, but she prepared some snacks and then took them to his room. When she opened the door, she saw 4 empty glasses on the table, but there was nobody else in the room. When she looked over at the window, she saw A leaning out, getting ready to jump. They lived on the 8th floor, so he would undoubtedly die if he fell. Panicking, she grabbed her son and pulled him back in. "Wait for me, guys!" he screamed, reaching into the air. "Don't leave me here!" And although she managed to pull him back inside, this went on for several more days. Of course, his mother couldn't let this continue, and so she asked a friend to introduce her to a famous shaman, and they decided to hold a cleansing ceremony for him. According to this shaman, he was almost taken to the other side by these spirits unable to move on. And so, A came back to his senses. But as he finished his story, A said one last thing. "Diko is still officially missing, but I think she's dead. Because, sometimes the three of them still come to see me." A student regularly visits an arcade near his school, but for some reason, it always closes early each night. One night, he decides to hang around and find out why. A decision he'll quickly regret. Find out why in My Regular Arcade. This happened 2 or 3 years ago. There was this arcade I always visited, but for some reason it always closed at 10 p.m. It wasn't like it wasn't busy or anything, probably because it was close to a university, and even at night there were always lots of people there. But whenever 10 p.m. rolled around, the old man who ran the arcade always chased all the customers out. Of course, at that time of night, it was mostly delinquents, to close it. I was a regular, so I knew him pretty well. Well, that is to say that whenever we saw each other outside the arcade, we'd say hello, but that was about it. So, one night, I was playing my favourite machine, 19XX. That game just never ends, right? When the old guy said he was closing up. "Why do you always close so early?" I asked him. But he ignored me and started pulling the shutters down. All the other guys there started grumbling and filing out. Annoyed, I looked at him out the corner of my eye while I continued playing. "I'll leave once I'm done, so let me finish," I said. A short while later, after I'd cleared the screen, I suddenly turned around and saw something odd. There was a person stuck to the glass of the arcade's front door, looking straight at me. But I was sure the old man had already closed the shutters. I was so surprised that I couldn't move. But then the old man spoke up. "It's always around this time you start to see things like that here," he said. And so, the two of us left through the rear exit. That arcade is still in business, even now. A woman working late night in a department store discovers something horrifying in the toilets. A dark history that, it seems, still lingers in the building. Find out what in Basement Toilet. This happened when I was working at a department store in Namba, Osaka. One day, around 3 years ago, we were rearranging the sales floor until late into the night. When we were finally done, I went to the toilets in the basement, and there I saw a woman by the sinks. I didn't recognize her uniform, and because it was so late, I found it a little strange, but I figured she was working late like me, and that was that. However, the woman was looking down at the ground, like she didn't feel well. "Are you okay?" I asked. "It hurts. It hurts," she said. "Oh no, well, let me help you back to the office and you can rest there," I said, and held out my hand. Without looking up, the woman grabbed my hand. I jumped in surprise. her hand was freezing. It was at that point I started to suspect that woman wasn't of this world. I immediately let go of her hand, and then she turned her downcast face towards me. I mustn't look at her, I thought, but my eyes wouldn't listen to me. The woman's face was pale, and I sensed no life in her. She stood up, and then chased after me. "Help me! Help me!" I couldn't even scream. Stumbling backwards, I tried to leave the toilets, but looking closely at the woman, she was gripping her chest. "Help me!" she muttered again, and then disappeared right in front of my eyes. Trembling, I ran back to the office. When I told one of my colleagues about what had just happened, she looked at me and was like, "So you saw her too, huh? She often appears there. You see..." Apparently, a 17-year-old girl was stabbed in that basement over 20 years ago by a woman who worked in a Western-style apparel store. It was a pretty famous case at the time. And so, that girl left this world with regret, and even now, it seems she's still suffering in that toilet. When a girl arrives home from school one day, she notices something slip into the house before her. But what is it, and what does it really want? Find out in The Strange Figure. I heard this story from a friend of mine. This friend's aunt had a strong sixth sense, and people often went to her for help with spiritual matters. When people lived too far away, they even sent her letters asking for advice. My friend told me about one of those letters she received. This letter was written by a female student. When she was on her way home from school one day, she noticed someone entering her house. She thought it might have been her younger brother, or perhaps her mother returning from an outing, but when she reached the door, it was locked. A short while later, her brother also returned, and when she asked him if he had come home earlier, he said he didn't. The girl thought it odd, but maybe she didn't actually see what she thought she saw, so she pushed it out of her mind. However, after that, she started seeing strange things at home. Around dinner time one day, the girl was in the living room, and when she cast a glance towards the kitchen, she saw her mother's back as she was cooking something. But oddly, it wasn't just her mother standing there. There were two of her. Surprised, one of the figures then slowly turned to face her. It wasn't her mother, but rather, this figure had no face other than a mouth that was smiling at her. Another time, she was in the bathroom washing her hair. She was there alone, of course, but she heard the sound of water splashing in the tub. When she lifted her head and looked into the tub, she saw that same face looking back at her in the water's reflection. Her mother ran a dressmaking class from their home, so they had a room with a sewing machine in it, the type that worked with a pedal. One day, she could hear that sewing machine going late into the night. She thought maybe a student was there, but it was rather late, so she went over to have a look. There, she saw a woman sitting at the sewing machine. But this woman didn't look normal. Her neck and arms were hanging towards the ground, but her foot was furiously pumping the pedal. And then, after watching her for a moment, the woman then turned around. It was her. She then stood up and ran straight towards the girl, who took off running for her own room. She then locked herself inside. That was apparently the contents of her letter. It seemed that girl was the only one in the house who had seen the woman, and she desperately wanted help. The taxi driver in this next story picks up some young women he spots on the side of the road. When they ask him to take them to the hospital, he obliges, but when he gets there, he quickly discovers something isn't right. What's really going on? Find out in 3 Passengers. A taxi driver was on the road when he passed 3 young women on the side, standing with their hands up. "Oh, some passengers," he thought, and pulled over so they could get in. He asked them where they wanted to go, and one of them said her stomach hurt, so they wanted to go to the nearest hospital. Looking closer, one girl had a terrible complexion and appeared to be in great pain. "Oh no, that's terrible," the driver said, and so he rushed towards the famous T hospital that was nearby. "I'll stay with her," one of the girls said when they arrived, indicating the other one in pain. "I'm sorry, but could you go inside and get someone for us?" The driver got out of the taxi and made his way over to the front desk of the hospital. He told one of the nurses what was going on and asked if she could come back to the taxi to help. The nurse agreed and made her way over to the car while the driver waited. But when the nurse returned shortly thereafter, her face was pale. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she said. The driver didn't understand what she was saying. "I said, what on earth do you think you're doing?" the nurse said again. "Why are there dead bodies in your car?" According to the nurse, 2 or 3 days earlier, some female university students were out for a drive when they had an accident. They were brought to the hospital, but they all died. At that very moment, their bodies were still in that hospital's morgue. But now, those bodies were in the driver's taxi. "Did you plan on taking those bodies away from the hospital?" the nurse asked, but the driver claimed that when they got on board, they all very much looked alive to him. And the place they had their accident? It was exactly where the taxi driver picked them up. What on earth was it that those girls wanted? When a young man goes camping with colleagues, he notices a missed call late at night. A missed call from home. But nobody's at home right now, so who could it possibly be? Find out in Call from Home. Last summer, I went camping at the Nasu Highlands. All of us new recruits who started that spring got along really well, and so we planned for 5 of us, 3 guys and 2 girls, to spend one night there. Since we all had 3 days off, there was no need to arrange time off with the company together, and things proceeded smoothly. Plus, one of the girls was a colleague I had just started dating. When we arrived, we visited the Nasu Highland Park, Nasu Safari Park, and also lit some fireworks. We all made curry and rice together, and then played cards late into the night. We were so tired from all the fun that we fell asleep without even getting changed. And before I knew it, I fell asleep too. I had a dream. A dream that somebody was shaking and calling me. It felt like they were shaking me around my waist, and when I woke up, I realized my phone in my pants pocket was ringing. I generally left it on silent, so it didn't seem to have woken anyone else up. I looked at the screen and it said, "Home." At this hour? Half asleep, I started to panic, wondering if something happened at home. But as I answered it, suddenly the phone hung up. Checking the call history, I saw that home had called me 3 times. Careful not to wake my girlfriend or the others, I went outside and tried to call back. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. They had just called me, and yet neither my father, mother, nor younger sister was answering. Did something happen to them? Just as I was about to call my younger sister's phone, a horrifying realization washed over me. I quickly sobered up, and the anxiety I felt quickly turned to fear. This spring, I started my career and moved out of home to start living alone for the first time. I changed home in my phone to parents, and now my current apartment's phone was listed as home instead. I hadn't even given my girlfriend a spare key yet, and so how did I receive 3 calls from an apartment that was supposed to be empty? I woke the others up and explained what was going on. Someone said that maybe it was a thief or an intruder, but then my girlfriend said, "Next time they call, let me answer." However, the phone didn't ring again after that. After that trip, my girlfriend and I got into a huge argument. She was convinced I had a girl on the side who had a key to my apartment, and it was this woman making prank calls. Of course, I knew best of all that I most definitely did not have another girl on the side. But in the end, this was why she broke up with me. It was no doubt difficult for her to be in the same workplace as me after that, so she soon quit as well. But what on earth was up with those calls? There was no way it could have been a thief or an intruder. And even if someone did break in, there was no way for them to know my number. Either someone I knew had a spare key, or it had to be something supernatural. Either answer was honestly terrifying, so I tried not to think about it anymore. And shortly after that, I moved out. Just recently, I remembered something. Shortly before that trip, my girlfriend and I got into an argument over something strange. I got a call from her, and when I answered, she went, "What? You just called me, right?" "No," I said. "Well, I have a call from you." "I didn't call you." "You did." She refused to believe me, and in the end, I gave in. "Well, I don't remember it, but maybe I did call you." Someone called me while we were camping, and someone called my girlfriend while I was home without me noticing. Considering that nothing has happened to me since moving, it must have been either the person who lived there before me, or perhaps someone not of this world. When a teen visits their parents late one night, they discover something odd on the road outside. Something, it seems, that has a horrifying history. Find out what in The Human-Like Figure. When I was 19, I visited my parents' house in the city unannounced one night, and I parked my car on the shoulder of a nearby road. I think it was around 10 p.m. by the time I made my way back to my car, but as I was walking over, I saw a figure on the other side of the road that seemed to be wobbling. It twisted and swayed as it slowly made its way towards me. "Well, that's new," I thought, and I rushed over to my car, but something didn't feel right. Could people even bend that way? I wondered. Like, it was twisting wildly to the left and right. Being night, I couldn't see it clearly at first, but as I squinted to get a better look at it, I was quickly filled with regret for not leaving sooner. When that figure reached the light from a street light just 2 poles away, I saw it, The entire thing was pink, like a moving lump of human-shaped flesh. A chill ran down my spine and I sped out of there like a bullet. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that I shouldn't look at it, and I knew I shouldn't let it catch up to me. But I made my way back home, rather than heading back to my much closer parents' house. I didn't want it to follow me there, so I decided to go to my house, which was further away instead. Thankfully, as I glanced in the rearview mirror while I drove, I didn't see it chasing me. That kune-kune type thing terrified me, but luckily, nothing happened. A few weeks later, I visited my parents during the day, and when I told my mother what happened, she gave me a surprising response. "When you say the alley, do you mean by so-and-so-san's house?" "Yeah, it was twisting and turning down the end there." "Ah. What is it?" "Their son recently died in a traffic accident. You don't live here anymore, so you wouldn't have heard about it. But apparently he got hit head on, and, well, it wasn't pretty, so..." Both my mother and I had seen things like this before around the house and even on holiday, so we could guess what it was. I don't know if her guess was right or not, but I only ever saw that kune-kune type thing just that one time. My mother has since passed away, and so I haven't been home for a long, long time. And honestly, I'm too scared to. Finally this week, a university student grows concerned when a formerly active and outgoing friend suddenly refuses to leave his apartment. When he heads over to check on him, he finds out the horrifying truth as to why. Find out in Woman with the White Face. Let me tell you about a friend from my university days, Fujimoto Konosuke. When he first started, Fujimoto was a bright, active guy who loved hanging out. Then, around the spring of our second year, he started renting an apartment near the university and began living alone. For the first 2 weeks or so, he often had parties and friends over, probably because his parents could no longer tell him off for being so noisy. But then, about a month after he moved in, suddenly Fujimoto stopped hanging out with others. And even when he came to school, if people invited him out, he would refuse and immediately go home. Even his personality changed, and he was no longer loud and lively, but became oddly absent-minded, even when people spoke directly to him. Confused with this sudden change in him, I asked him what was going on. At first, he didn't seem to want to say anything, but then, almost shyly, he smiled. "Actually, I have a girlfriend, and we're now living together," he revealed. Hearing that, I was both surprised and a little jealous. I asked him all sorts of questions about her, but he wouldn't tell me anything. In the end, all I got out of him was, "She's extremely lonely and doesn't like being alone in the apartment. That's why I don't go out much anymore." "Well, then you should bring her out with you," I said. "She's sickly, and it's hard for her to go out," he replied. Something about all of this just didn't sit right with me. Like, if she was so sickly, how did she and Fujimoto, who was always so active, meet? And how did she make a living if she never left the apartment? I wanted to know more, but it wasn't exactly an easy topic to broach, so I let it be. If Fujimoto was satisfied, then I had no right to question him. And so I left it at that, and we went our separate ways. But Fujimoto suddenly stopped coming to university after that. After 10 days passed and I still hadn't seen him, I found it weird and decided to call him. However, it seemed he hadn't paid his bills, and so his phone was cut off. Worried, I decided to visit him directly at his apartment. I called a few other close friends on the way over, but nobody could make it, so in the end, I went alone. Fujimoto's apartment was your average type you might see anywhere. When I got there, I pressed the doorbell, but there was no response. Thinking he might not be home, I turned to leave, but then I heard noises coming from inside. So just in case, I put my ear to the door and I heard a voice whispering. I pressed the doorbell again, and then a few more times. And then the door finally opened and Fujimoto's face peeked out from the crack. "Fujimoto, what are you doing?" "Oh, it's you," he said, and then he opened the door wide. I was shocked when I saw his face. He was pale and gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, and with all the stubble on his cheeks, he looked like a completely different person. I was at a loss for words. "Well, come in," he said. "Seeing as you're already here, I might as well introduce you to my girlfriend." He left the door open behind him as he walked back into the apartment. I quickly took my shoes off and followed him. From the narrow entrance, there was a small kitchen that doubled as a corridor, and beyond that was a door leading to another room. Fujimoto opened the door and said, "A friend's here," to someone inside. I followed him in. "Sorry for just showing up like this," I said, getting ready to introduce myself to his girlfriend. But as I looked around the room, I was again shocked. There was no sign of a woman anywhere. There was, in fact, barely anything that could even be called furniture in this rather small room. And instead, there was just fast food and convenience store rubbish like instant noodle cups lying all over the floor. But the strangest thing of all was the large fish tank, about 1 meter long, in the middle of the room, sitting on a very sturdy steel stand. It was filled to the brim with water, and inside was a mass of black seaweed about the size of a volleyball, just floating there. "This is my friend Nakayama. I told you about him before, right?" Fujimoto said to the air as he stood next to me. "Hey, get it together, man. Nobody else is here." "Nobody else is here? Don't be stupid. And you're being incredibly rude towards my girlfriend." As if in response to his words, the black mass in the water tank then moved. Then it seemed to spread apart in the water, and something white appeared from inside it. I couldn't take my eyes off it, and as soon as I realized what it was, I screamed. It was the white face of a woman with her eyes closed. Her head full of black hair was floating in this huge fish tank. I thought it was seaweed, but it was hair. Then, suddenly, her eyes opened right in front of me, and when she saw me, those colorless lips twitched and grinned. I fled the room as fast as I could, and I never saw Fujimoto again after that. Fujimoto then went missing, and his parents filed a missing persons report. Police came to the university and asked us all sorts of questions, but in the end, they never found him. I heard that after he disappeared, all they found in his room was that huge fish tank. A massive thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Ella C, Emerald, and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Kaihan, Bizarre Crimes That Shook Japan Volume 2, out on Amazon right now. And check out our merchandise store at kowabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.